Okay, here's the next part. We are going to be painting a landscape. This is not a painting class. This is not an official art class where you have to know how to draw or paint. This is just a painting assignment. So it's going to be very rough. My example is going to be very rough. Hopefully yours comes out better than mine, but hopefully you get some ideas of how to do it. First, I Google searched vacation photos just to get a neat landscape from somewhere. And then when I found the one I wanted, I right-clicked on it like this. This isn't the one I picked, but I right-clicked and I went to copy image. Then when I went into Photoshop, I pasted it. Actually, here is the image I found. I didn't want to paint the person or the boat. I just thought these islands looked like something out of Jurassic Park, and they looked really cool. And I wanted to go somewhere from there. In fact, they also kind of look like buildings, so that's the direction I wanted to take it in. These buildings, these ruins coming up out of the water that are overgrown. Of course, what I'm going to do is going to be very scribbly, but it could always be turned into a much more detailed painting. So once I got some ideas and looked at what I wanted, I went into my brushes and I found the brush I made of perspective, and then I made it the size that I wanted. I used the bracket keys that are next to the letter P. The left bracket makes it smaller, the right bracket makes it bigger. I also chose black as my foreground color, and I made my own layer called a grid, and I painted it right on there. So I already did this for you to save you time. I just stamped it. I just clicked once where I wanted it, and it painted these perspective lines. And it's on its own layer. So now you don't have to draw all these, but you can draw things really rough in perspective quickly. So that is what I did. I drew the grid on, and then I made a new layer above it called a sketch. I grabbed the brush, and I changed from this brush up here just to a very simple brush. Hit enter, and it's way too big, so I use my bracket key, or you can go up here, turn it way down, so it's like a pencil. And I started drawing. And I drew some just simple geometric shapes, but I followed the perspective lines. So if you click somewhere and then hold down Shift along a line, it'll paint from a straight line from there to there. So I just connected lines and drew an image that way. Here's the really, really rough grid sketch that I did. I drew like a pyramid with water coming out and rocks coming out of the water, and then some just rectangles coming up, rectangular prisms coming up out of the water and reflections. And then I scribbled some like trees and stuff growing onto the top, some clouds in the sky, a little road that snaked around, and that's it. I had no idea what I was doing, just playing around, and I wasn't being careful. I was going as fast as I could, so yours could probably be even better. Once I drew it in, I turned the opacity on the layers panel way down so I could see it, but when I started painting, it wouldn't be distracting to me. In fact, I'm going to turn the grid view off, the layer. I'm going to turn the visibility off. You don't have to, but I'm going to, because now I want to take this confusing mess and organize my values into light, medium, and dark. Except I'm going to use color this time. So I already did this. I just picked a random color for my water, and this was going to be my light. So you can tell my water is definitely not a white bright for my light value. So I had to make my dark a nice dark bluish purple sky, and my middle values would be the buildings themselves. So that was the rough idea I wanted. Everything else, this road would have to be fitting into the light scheme. The clouds would fit in with the dark. The greens on the buildings would have to fit into the middle. It's just going to have to work out that way because of the way I organized it. So after that, I knew I wanted like the green trees growing up here and water pouring down and some green growing back here in the clouds, so in the rocks. So I wanted to keep them in the values and I painted those in real rough. I just used my brush, chose the size, chose the color, tried to match it. Now, if I painted something and it was way too different, like let's say I picked a green and the green was way too dark. Whoops. The green was way too dark for that value area. This is supposed to be middle. I could, since it was on its own layer, I could use image, adjustments, and levels, and I could move things around until they were within that middle range. A good way to tell is if you squint. If it's not too distracting when you squint, you're in the right neighborhood. And I'm actually going to delete that little example. There we go. So after I did these rough details, I could start getting a little more detailed. I didn't know, I was looking where the highest contrast was of light and dark, and it's, whoops, and it's around here. And that's, I kind of didn't want to focus on the ruins. I wanted them to be kind of the background. So instead of having a woman on a boat, I got an idea, ooh, this is kind of an imaginary looking place. So what if I had this gross monster tentacle thing coming up and maybe I was walking down and it grabbed me and the only thing left was my glasses. So I just looking at this, I got that idea. I had some room and this is the lightest part here. So I'd make the tentacle right here and make it really dark. And now I have my highest contrast, and this is going to be the main detail I want people to focus on. And again, there's nothing, extraordinary about any of this. It's very, very sloppy. In fact, you can still see my scribbly drawing. We're moving right along. And whenever I wanted to, I could flip my grid on still. And if I needed to make something a little more detailed in perspective, I could do that. Now, another thing I did is you can see I have all these layers over here. It started to get out of hand really quick, so I named them. I made sure they were named, and then I clicked down here on this folder and made a group. And then I put, so these were the light, medium, and dark values inside this folder. So I could turn those on and off whenever I wanted, or I could just minimize it so it didn't make the list really long. So since we already handled these values, I can zip that up. We had the sketch in there. We had the rough details put in. It's starting to get more. It gave me the idea to make the tentacle of the monster. Then I just started adding in some more details. So like I took some light purple and I added some mist in the background to make the contrast a little bit lower. And then I added light. So I'm turning layers on and off right now. If you notice, my light layer is 12% opaque. If I turn it all the way up to 100, you can see this was the color I chose for the light, but this throws off my whole value scheme. So I wanted it to be a little more understated. So I moved it down. I think it was about 11 or 12 that you could see the light, but it didn't take over. So that's something to think about. I did the same thing with shadow. 100%, it was very high contrast, which I do like the look of that. So I might keep it more high contrast. I moved it down, though. I wanted the tentacle to be really the only thing up here you were focusing on. But you could still see shadow details. Okay? So I had a shadow layer. I had some reflections and some bounce light just to give it a little more. And I haven't even really gone into details. I'm just kind of messing around and painting with brushes on different layers and changing the opacity. And when I'm trying to pick a color, like, ooh, I want to pick that color, and I was in my brush, I could hold down the Alt button that's next to the space bar and click on a color I want, and it changes the foreground color to whatever you click on. So there's another thing to keep in mind while you're working. It saves time because when you let go of the Alt button, it goes back to being a brush and you can go back to painting and then changing opacity and adding more layers. Now all these light effects I did, you can see before and after. It really changed it, but I still wanted to preserve the values. Now they're all in this. I made another group called light effects by clicking this button, and I named it, and I dragged all of those layers into here. So now I can close that folder, turn the whole thing on and off if I want. And then this is the point where I could really turn this into a nice painting. I could paint these in as real bricks. I could put columns. I could have vines growing. You could see the leaves. Maybe there's little monkeys up on the tops, the bricks, and I could make a little neat cave that this water's coming out of. But I'm only going to go into a little bit more detail. And what I used, I'm going to make a temporary layer, was one of the things I definitely want you to use. When you hold down your mouse on the brush and click, all these other brushes pop up. The mixer brush tool. I'm going to choose that. You can choose the size and the hardness, just like you always could. But we have a whole new set of options up here. The only options that you really should have right here, if you hold the mouse over it without clicking, it'll tell you what it is. This is the brush loads a color after every time you do it. So you'll be bringing colors and mixing them all over. We're going to, instead of having it clicked where it's dark, we're going to unclick that. What we're going to do is the next one. This one says it cleans your brush out after every stroke. So you're not going to be dragging colors where you don't want them. You do want this darkened. The rest of this you can leave. And what you can do with this now is if you have a sharp area of two colors that you don't want to be that sharp, you can take your wet brush and mix it, and it blends it really nicely. Now, if you blend the whole thing, it's going to be blurry, but there's certain areas where you probably want to soften edges. So keep zooming back and looking at it and see what looks good, and practice using the mixer brush. That's one of the things on the rubric, is that you use a mixer brush to blend some of your colors at the end. All right, so I'm going to delete what I just did there. And so here are some details I added, including painting with a mixer brush. And it wasn't much. I added some variation, some hints at bricks maybe. And you can see they're scribbly, cracks and bricks. I added some spots to the tentacle and the shadow. A little bit more detail here and there. I added some reflection to the top of the water. And I added some stars in the sky that were not too distracting from the overall, but they're there. So is this an amazing painting? Oh my goodness, no. But it should teach you a lot about building up layers of color that you can turn on and off, adjust the opacity, how to use a mixer brush to blend some of your colors. You can see where I blended some parts of the sky. How to use a regular brush, choose your colors. I also used a trick, and I'll show you on a layer, where instead of using a brush, I used the lasso tool, and I'll pretend there's maybe some rocks right here, or some bushes. I'll put some bushes right here. Instead of painting the shape, I selected the shape, and then I clicked on my foreground color, and I picked the color I want, But then I picked another color on the background color. So maybe I click on this foreground color, and then I choose another one that's a little darker and a little bit bluer. So now the background and foreground colors are pretty different actually. And now I click on the gradient tool. We did the gradient tool a little bit on the last assignment, but now I could drag, and there we go. This bush is now not just one color, it's a gradient. So using a gradient somewhere in your picture is something I am also going to be checking for points. You want to use a gradient. No, you could even use a gradient to do something like this. If you want a color cast to your whole picture, you could go pick a yellow or something, and then the background color, maybe pick like a red, pick a gradient, and I'm going to go over the whole image. So now it goes from yellow to red, but it covers up everything. It's on the top layer. If I drag it down underneath, it looks horrible because you see parts of it. I'm going to keep it on the top. I'll name it maybe color cast. And I'll just adjust the opacity and turn it way down so you can see it, and it warms up your picture, but it doesn't cover everything up. So here's it without it. Here's about 16%. That might be too much, depending on the look. Without, with. Totally different feel to the picture. Maybe you want something more subtle. 6%. I can't even really tell until I turn the visibility on and off. So, I think I'm going to leave that at 6%. And of course, you could move this. You could move this into light effects, but then it'll only show in certain areas. So you're going to have to be very careful of where you put layers, and you can play around and drag them around. I want you to basically experiment with this. I might make one more example that's totally different than this, or I might go into more detail and finish this up, or both. I don't know. But I think this is enough of a beginning for you to get started on this assignment. Using brushes. Double check the rubrics too to see. And yeah, I'll probably do one more example that's totally different from this one, but we'll use the mixer brush, the gradients, the paintbrush, the custom brush with the grid perspective that we used. We're going to have a huge variety of paintings for this one. All right. I'm going to see what you can do based on this. I think you can get started on this before I do the next example. So I'm probably going to post this and then post another video after it's already been out, just to give you more ideas. All right. I can't wait to see what you make. All right. Have a good day.